This tale could easily be mistaken for a gripping novel, full of danger, mystery, and unexpected twists. But it is all true. The astonishing story of John Rutherford, a British sailor who vanished into the unknown lands of New Zealand and returned 10 years later transformed. It all began on January 9th, 1826, when an American brig sailing off the coast of New Zealand dropped anchor in Poverty Bay. As the crew watched the rugged shoreline, a lone canoe pushed off from the beach and made its way toward the ship with alarming speed. Standing at the bow was a tall man draped in a ceremonial cloak made of bird feathers. His body and face were covered in sacred tattoos of the Maori. Yet something about him defied logic. The man was a blonde-haired European. He climbed aboard and in perfect English addressed the startled crew. "Raise the sails immediately, or you will all be slaughtered." There was no time to question him. The sailors sprang into action. Once they had safely left the coastline behind, the man finally introduced himself. "My name is John Rutherford," he said. "I am the sole survivor of the crew of the ship Agnes." Rutherford's odyssey began decades earlier. Born in Manchester in 1796 to a poor family, John had started working in cotton mills before the age of 10. Dreaming of escape, he joined a ship and soon found himself swept into the life of a sailor. A hard, unforgiving existence, but still better than the factories of England. He served aboard British naval vessels, fought in the siege of San Sebastian in 1813, and later joined the crew of the brig Agnes, a small merchant ship with 14 crew members and 6 cannons. In 1816, they sailed into the Pacific, trading in pearls and tortoise shells. It was supposed to be a routine voyage. It was anything but. On March 6, 1816, after weeks at sea, the Agnes approached the Barrier Islands off the northern coast of New Zealand. But before they could reach safer waters, a violent storm surged from the northeast. For 5 brutal days, the brig was tossed like driftwood on the waves. When the sea finally calmed, the battered vessel found itself near the crescent-shaped shore of Poverty Bay, the very same bay where, in 1769, Captain Cook had first set foot on Maori land. Captain Coffin was hesitant to approach the unfamiliar coast. Fresh water was nearly gone, and the ship had suffered damage, but he feared hostile tribes. Still, necessity won. They dropped anchor and prepared to trade. The first to greet them were Maori women, about 30 in total, paddling out in canoes, laughing, singing, and bartering for metal goods. Some were allowed aboard, offering company for the night in exchange for nails, knives, and beads. But Rutherford later noted in his journal that they tried to steal nearly everything, even prying nails from the ship's hull. Tensions grew. The next morning, a larger war canoe approached, holding over 100 Maori men. Among them was a powerful chief who, in a gesture of peace, offered to help refill the crew's water barrels. Trade began. Pigs, flax mats, and food in exchange for European goods. The crew gradually let their guard down, but not everything was as it seemed. Late that day, a second shipment of water was delivered. The sailors noticed something disturbing. The ship's boat used for transport was leaking badly. Their carpenter discovered that nearly all the nails in the hull had been removed. Around the same time, Rutherford caught a Maori man attempting to steal lead. When confronted, the man bared his teeth and raised a stone axe in silent threat. Then came the demand. In exchange for fresh water, the chief now insisted on 2 muskets, gunpowder, and lead shot, a steep and dangerous price. European captains had already learned the risk of arming local tribes, but there was no room for negotiation. The deal was made. That night, as the crew prepared to leave, the deck was crowded with over 300 Maori men. Suddenly, the chief threw off his mat and began a war chant, brandishing a mare, a flat, razor-sharp weapon made of greenstone or punamu, believed to hold mystical power. His warriors joined in, stomping and shouting in unison. It was the haka, a fearsome Maori war dance. Captain Coffin and the few men on deck froze in terror. In the blink of an eye, the attack began. Rutherford, clinging to the rigging, watched in horror as the chief struck the captain on the head with his weapon. The cook tried to defend him, but was also cut down. The first mate made a dash for the stairs but was hit from behind and collapsed. Dozens of warriors surged below deck, while others cut the ship's ropes and captured the remaining crew. Some sailors jumped overboard in desperation, only to be dragged back by swimmers waiting in the sea. Within minutes, the Agnes was lost. The surviving crew were bound and thrown into canoes. On the beach, they were tied to trees as the Maori looted every nail, every scrap of iron, and every bit of canvas from the ship. By nightfall, the brig was torched, its flames illuminating the faces of the prisoners as screams echoed through the dark. Only 12 sailors had survived the massacre. By morning, half of them would be dead. Bound and bruised, the captured sailors were dragged inland by their captors, deeper into the heart of an alien world. That night, they were tied to trees as enormous fires were lit along the beach. Shadows flickered across the warriors' tattooed faces as they dismantled what was left of the Agnes, pulling out even the final nails before setting the ship ablaze. What followed would haunt Rutherford forever. Under the glow of firelight, the remaining crew were forced to watch as their fallen comrades were prepared for ritual consumption. The stories whispered in English taverns about Maori cannibalism, once dismissed as savage myths, now unfolded before their eyes, horrifying, undeniable, and real. Rutherford wrote in his journal, "They brought us baskets of sweet potatoes and meat that resembled pork, but the scent, the taste, something in us recoiled. We dared not eat. We knew what it truly was." The next day, only 6 of the original crew remained. Stripped of hope, they were marched deeper inland, accompanied by 5 tribal chiefs. Their destination was a Maori pa, a fortified village nestled between thick forests and carved riverbeds. As they approached, around 200 villagers gathered, dropping to their knees in ritual mourning, crying, cutting their faces and arms with sharp obsidian flakes, blood flowing as a sign of respect for the returning chiefs. To the sailors' astonishment, they were not immediately killed. Instead, they were invited into the chief's house, a large, low structure made of woven reeds and thatch. A feast was waiting for them: roasted pork, yams, and shellfish. They were seated not with slaves, but alongside the chiefs. The message was clear. They were being treated not as prisoners, but as guests, or perhaps something more. Over the next days, they were given back some of their belongings: knives, tobacco boxes, and clothing. The village women, whom Rutherford described as mild and curious, brought them food and even wiped sweat from their brows as they healed. But there was a hidden purpose behind this hospitality. It was not long before the real transformation began. Without warning, the Maori declared that the surviving sailors would receive tamoko, the sacred tattoo of the tribe. For the Maori, this wasn't mere decoration. It was identity. It was ancestry. It was a soul etched in skin. Rutherford recalled the moment with trembling precision. "We were laid down, each of us held by 5 or 6 men. 2 others began the work, using chisels made of bone and shark teeth. The ink was a paste of burnt wood and water. With sharp taps, they drove the chisel into our flesh, cutting the skin open and filling the wounds with the dark dye. The pain was unbearable, yet Rutherford endured it in silence. Others cried out, but he remained still, earning the respect of the villagers. For 4 hours, his face and body were carved with symbols of strength, courage, and spiritual connection. When it was over, the chief's daughter herself brought him to the river and bathed his swollen face, her hands gentle and silent. The villagers now called him tapu, sacred. No one was allowed to touch him. For 3 days, he was left in isolation, treated with awe. This, Rutherford later wrote, was not punishment. It was Weeks passed. The swelling from Rutherford's tamoko began to fade. His sight returned, the pain ebbed, replaced by something stranger, a feeling of belonging. The Maori now treated him as one of their own. He and the remaining sailors were given a house to live in, built by the villagers. They were allowed to cook for themselves. They hunted, fished, and roamed the hills. The tribe even returned to them a stolen iron cooking pot, now considered tapu, untouchable by anyone but them. Still, danger remained. One morning, a village elder, the mother of a chief, died after eating food prepared by Rutherford's companion, who had lent his knife to a servant. In the eyes of the tribe, that single act of sharing had violated the sacred order. Accusations flew. A tribal tribunal was held. One sailor was executed. Rutherford was spared, but he was alone. Months passed, then years. He learned the Maori language. He adopted their dress, hunted with them, and began to share in their rituals. His status grew. One day, Chief Amy, a man of power and influence, called a council of elders. "I wish to make this man a rangatira," he declared, a chief. Rutherford agreed. His hair was cut with a shell, red ochre was rubbed into his face and hair, and he was gifted a beautifully carved mirror of greenstone, a warrior's weapon, and a symbol of leadership. From that moment on, he walked not as a captive, but as a tribal leader. But to rule, he had to marry. A chief, after all, could not remain alone. He sold up his back and daughters, seated modestly behind the crowd. He chose them both. The younger giggled nervously. The elder tried to flee, but she was gently brought back. Their names were Sho and Ipeku. They became his wives. For the next several years, Rutherford lived as a high-ranking Maori. He helped manage crops, hunted wild pigs and parrots, and led raids on neighboring tribes. He wore feathered cloaks, carried his greenstone weapon, and danced the haka in times of war. He also met others like him, former sailors who had been captured and, over time, had forgotten their native tongues. One was James Maori, who had lived with the Maori for 8 years, and now considered himself more Maori than English. But John Rutherford never forgot where he came from. During one of many intertribal conflicts, known as the Musket Wars, Rutherford led 500 warriors into battle. The enemy also had guns and even another European among them. At one point, he crossed the river alone to meet with this man, who introduced himself as John Moman, an escaped British sailor who had married the daughter of another chief. That evening, Rutherford witnessed another Maori execution. A slave's heart was torn from his chest and offered to the gods. War, even among the Maori, was steeped in ritual and blood. During the final clash, Rutherford was wounded by a barbed spear in his thigh. It took 2 women using oyster shells to cut it out. His wife applied herbal poultices, stopping the bleeding and preventing infection. He survived. Nearly a decade had passed. Then, one morning in January 1826, smoke rose over the distant hills. News came rushing through the village. A ship had anchored in the bay. It was an American brig under the command of Captain Jackson. The Maori planned to ambush the crew, just as they had done years ago. They asked Rutherford to go aboard, to lure the sailors ashore. But Rutherford had other plans. Dressed in a feathered cloak, armed with his mirror, he boarded the canoe with 4 Maori and paddled toward the brig. As he climbed aboard, Captain Jackson stared in disbelief. "That's the white Maori," one of the sailors whispered. Rutherford stood tall. "I am no Maori," he said. "I'm an Englishman. My name is John Rutherford." Jackson took him to his cabin, where Rutherford told his story of capture, survival, cannibalism, love, war, and transformation. Jackson understood. He bound the Maori escort and returned Rutherford to the deck. The sails were hoisted, and with the wind at his back, John Rutherford left New Zealand behind. It was January 9th, 1826, 10 years and 3 months to the day since the Agnes had met its fate. Rutherford's journey didn't end there. He lived for a time in Tahiti, then in Australia, where he married. Eventually, he returned to England. In 1829, At a London exhibition, he displayed his full-body Maori tattoos and performed the haka before stunned audiences. His story attracted the attention of Charles Knight, a publisher, who interviewed him extensively and published The New Zealanders, being a narrative of adventures of John Rutherford, one of the earliest English-language accounts of Maori culture written from first-hand experience. In 1830, Rutherford was seen performing at fairs and markets in Manchester, dancing for curious onlookers, and then he vanished. Some claimed he returned to New Zealand. Others believed he died in obscurity. What remains is his diary, raw, vivid, and unmatched in detail. Through it, we see not just a sailor, but a witness to a world few Europeans ever truly understood. He was captured and captivated by a culture far from his own, and he lived to tell its story. Subscribe to the channel, Into the Friends, to make credible stories. Let's see you soon.